Hello everyone, welcome to another video from Fantasy Football Scout. My name is Az. Hello as well if you're listening on the podcast. If you're not aware, all of our videos get transformed into podcasts, so you can check them out on Spotify, Google or Apple podcasts as well. Or if you're listening to the podcast, check us out on YouTube as well. We've got daily videos over pre-season, ramping up to 2 videos a day, being streamed when the season starts. Today, we're going to be talking about value players. So you might have your dream team in mind with all of the most expensive players in the world, but obviously we all know that you can't do that. You've got to find players that are going to score highly relative to their price point. And this is exactly what this video is going to look at. All the things I'm going to be talking about today are available on the Fantasy Football Scout members area. They've got some great tools on there to allow you to compare players, to look at your team and how it is projected to do over the coming weeks and over the season. And of course, stats tables, which is what I'm going to be talking about quite a lot in this video. So this is your final chance, if you're listening on the Thursday, to lock in last season's price. The price will go up on the 8th of July. So if you're listening to this on the 7th, make sure you lock that in. If you listen to the 8th, sorry, it's a bit too late, but of course, it's still well worth it. So head over to fantasyfootballscout.co.uk to check out the tools. Right, so what is value? So there's different ways in which you can calculate the value of a player. What I've done in its kind of simplest form is essentially take the price of the players this season and look at their points scored over last season, and I've just divided their points by their price to give a value metric. The higher the value metric, the better that player has performed in relation to their price tag. So, for example, a player who's kind of worth 6.5 million, if they got you sort of 140, 150 points, that would be an absolute success. They'd be feature really highly on this kind of chart. If, for example, you owned a 11 million or 12 million forward, and they only got you 140, 150 points, that would be really poor value, and you could have spent that money elsewhere. The one thing that's difficult to kind of really work out where it fits into this is captaincy. I'm going to be talking a little bit about that kind of as we go. But for now, let's just look at the players in terms of their points. And I'm going to be looking at things like minutes per FPL point as well. Because obviously just looking at the total points doesn't take into account things like bans and AFCON and players missing out through injury and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to look at a few different ways in which we can measure value in this video. So we're going to start here. We're going to start with the most simplest one, which is what I just mentioned. At the top of this chart is Alisson. So 176 points for Alisson with a price of 5.5. It was brilliant value for him. He's priced at 5.5 this season. He was 6 million last season, so he's actually had a price drop despite a goalkeeper getting close to 200 points. I think if Alisson, was for another club, and like a Martinez who we've seen in previous seasons, or Pope, I think there'd be a big sort of appeal of paying 5.5 and trying to tap into those points. The issue, of course, with Liverpool is there's so many options across their squad that you might want to get. You've got, Salah, Diaz, Robertson, Trent. We might see Nunes come into it. A lot of people are looking at Jota, for example. So even players like Van Dijk and Matip they're all options. They're the team with by far the most options. So locking yourself into a goalkeeper can be a bit scary, but I can see why people would be tempted when you consider how many points he got for how cheap he is. Looking down the list, what I've tried to do here is I've essentially tried to build a team, and that'll be the next screen that we see, a team of these kind of value picks. There's a lot of goalkeepers that feature highly on this list because of how cheap they are, but they play every minute and they make saves. There isn't often a huge amount between a lot of the keepers. Alisson really was the kind of standout goalkeeper there. Jose Sa is third on the value list, 146 points he got, and there's a group of goalkeepers clustered around that kind of 130 to 150 mark. So I worry a little bit less when it comes to value of keepers, unless you really see someone kind of standing out. We didn't really get that last season. It didn't really matter if you were in the kind of 4.5 or 5 bracket or whatever. Ramsdale was doing it for the first half of the season, so was Sarr, but both of those players kind of dropped off towards the end. And we saw some 4.5 keepers doing well. Sanchez, for example, if you kept him whole season, he got something like 130 points, which isn't that far off what some of these other players got, and he was the cheapest starting goalkeeper in the game. We've also got a lot of defenders On him as well. So Cash actually comes second on this list, 147 points. He's only going to set you back 5 million. I believe that's a price drop from last season again. So looking at defence, we're all piling into these expensive wing backs, but this indicates there could be some really good value players to be had who are going to score well over the season in relation to what they cost. So if you're thinking of going, 4 at the back, maybe even 5 at the back, I'm a player like Cash, a player like Gabriel as well. He got 146 points, only 1 point less than Cash. Features really strongly. You've also got players like Matip as well, who was 5 million at the start of the last season. He's gone up to 6, but he's still 7th on the list. Even at 6, if he got 170 points again, be really, really good value. Van Dijk, 8. So both the centre-backs actually offering better value for their points than the likes of Trent and Robertson, which is something interesting to think about when we think about how many people are going to be piling on those fullbacks, paying a little bit less for the likes of Matip and Van Dijk. That money, what you do with that money, if you invest that well, it could be worth it. Then again, like I said in my video yesterday, I think Robertson and Trent can hit the heights of even higher than they did last season. Cancelo's an interesting one. Cancelo's in 5th here, so 201 points for him at 7 million. I mean, that is basically as good as it gets. I think, getting 201 points from a 7 million asset is absolutely incredible. 7.5 Trent, for example, is there. If your strikers are getting 200 points, if your midfielders are getting 200 points and they cost, even 10, 11 million, you're going to be happy with that. So absolutely fantastic value that he was. Looking a bit further down, you've got Ward-Prowse. We dropped right down from Van Dijk to Ward-Prowse. This is kind of eliminating, a lot of goalkeepers and defenders. Now we've already got our kind of back 5, which is Cash, Gabriel, Cancelo, Matip and Van Dijk. You've got loads of defenders and goalkeepers right the way down to Ward-Prowse, who's our first midfielder there in 31st place. 159 points, 6.5. He will cost you this season. Again, really good value for him. Plays every minute, unlikely to be affected by the 5 sub rule. Depends kind of how Southampton to get on, but looks really good. You've got Bowen then in 32nd. Interesting that Bowen got 206 points. Absolutely incredible return. 5 points more than Cancelo, who obviously costs a lot less. Bowen's had this big price hike. Whereas Cancelo's gone, I think he's gone up from 6 to 7, so he has gone up a fair bit, but he could even have been pushed up even more. I think Bowen at 8.5 is on the pricey end of a player like him. Can he repeat that season? Can West Ham have such a good season? Remains to be seen, but he'll cost you 8.5, and if he repeated that 206 points, that would obviously still be great value. And then you've got Conor Gallagher on here as well. I mean, he cost 6 million, got 140 points. Currently, he's at Chelsea. We're wondering if he's going to get on loan somewhere. If he does, he could obviously represent great value again, particularly if he goes back to Palace. Vieira knows how to kind of get the most out of him, but we'll have to kind of wait and see on that. Looking down to the other list, we've got Maddison next in 50th. And then I've added some other players in who I think are interesting picks and good value picks in Sacco, Bernardo Silva, Trossard. Son is there, 250 points, even at 12. He's in 54th if you're including him. So he's our first kind of premium asset that we see. Notice he's sort of Salah is nowhere to be seen on this list, for example. Zaha, Fornals, even Rodri makes the list. You've got to go down to Mount, Veltman, and you've got to go right down to 80th before you find Ivan Toney. So our first striker, who obviously we've got to select in our squad. So what does that mean? Well, that gives us a team that you can sort of conceivably put together. We've got Alisson in goal as our sort of best budget player in the game, along with Van Dijk, Cancelo, Gabriel, Matip and Cash. So 5 at the back. The value really is in defence this season, as we talked about. A midfielder, Ward-Prowse, Bowen, Gallagher and Maddison. And then up front, Ivan Toney. And I believe that leaves about 9 million in the bank or something like that. What we haven't got here, of course, is a premium asset. And this is where the kind of captaincy element really comes into this. How do you factor captaincy in when you're talking about the value of a player? I've thought really hard about this, working out ways in which we could kind of do this. I debated kind of doubling everyone's points to see what their value was if you captained that player for every week, but then that doesn't really work because obviously you can only captain one player every week. So in the end, what I thought I'd do is I'd just captain Salah's points. Let's just assume that you captain Salah every week for 38 game weeks, and where would that kind of rank him on the value chart? And what that does is that pushes him up to first by quite a considerable way. We've got 530 points in total, cost you 13 million, and that Alisson back. Again, there's limitations to this because obviously if you didn't captain Salah, you'd captain someone else, and then their points would go up, and then their value would increase. So it's not the kind of perfect metric, and it's more of a question for you to think about: is how important do you consider this kind of captaincy element to be? For me, it's so important to have a player who brings in reliable, consistent returns. You could go without any premiums at all. You could focus purely on getting value for money and try and build a team around that. But then you're going to be hopping between different players, trying to jump onto hauls every week. Whereas when you go for a premium asset, they might have penalties, playing an attacking sides like Man City, Spurs, Liverpool. You kind of guarantee yourself at least chances in every game to do well. So I think the captaincy is really important. I would strongly suggest that people have at least one premium in their side. Like I talked about yesterday as well, I think this kind of double up with Salah and one of the Man City players is so important, particularly for those first 5 weeks where they play 4 promoted teams across those 5 games. So, it'd be interesting to know what you all think of that. How important you regard that kind of captaincy element. It's a huge thing in the game. It's a difficult one to get right. It can lead to huge points and things like that. If you're brave to kind of go without Salah or go with just one premium and invest that money around, do you think you can get enough value from your players to not have that kind of captaincy option? I think that's something really important to consider. If we add a premium to that team that I just mentioned, we still have 5 at the back. It's Alisson in goal, Cancelo, Gabriel, Matip, Cash, Cody, Salah, Ward-Prowse, Bowen, Maddison, and Tony up front. Now, I actually don't think this is a bad team at all. So if we build a team sort of purely off the kind of value metrics that we kind of talked about, there isn't really too many weaknesses here. I mean, there's still quite a lot of money in the bank. If you don't think Cody, for example, is going to repeat, what we saw from him from Wolves, where they had a really good defensive season, he got a couple of goals, but kind of trailed off to the end. There's money in the bank to do something like Cody to Trent or Robertson, but that means you'd have to sacrifice one of Salah, Matip, and Alisson, which is what I've had to do here. I had to lose Van Dijk because obviously Salah came in, so Van Dijk had sort of left the team for Cody coming in, but there is still money in the bank if you want to go for another City defender or something like that. And I think, that front 5, Salah, Ward-Prowse, Bowen, Maddison, Tony, there's no Man City players there, there's no Spurs players there, but it's a good, solid team. I would expect this team to do well again next season, and I'd expect all of these players to feature highly if we did this kind of experiment next year as well. So, I think this is, if you were purely looking at value players, I think this would actually be a solid base to kind of start with your team, and then you've got money in the bank to do some upgrades. Let's take a look at another way of doing it, and this is looking at points per minute. Now, this is quite interesting because we get a kind of a different sort of idea of players here. So what I've done here is look at points per minute and looked at their price as well, obviously, and then sort of combine them together to give a score, which indicates kind of how good that player is at scoring points for your team, essentially. Relative to their price. So this doesn't include the total they've done, it just includes kind of the games they've played and the points they've scored. So right at the top of the list, someone we talked about yesterday is Chilwell. Chilwell features first. Minutes per point of 10 is the best in the league over the season, but given he had quite a limited sample. We got Doherty in there as well. I left him in. We're not sure what's going to happen with Spurs in that right wing back spot. There's talks about Jed Spence coming in. We have seen Doherty moving over to the left. With this 5 sub rule, are we going to see Doherty sort of have significant minutes? He was so good for them towards the end of last season before that injury. I was tempted to kind of leave him out. I've left out some players from this table who just aren't really options for us, like Bergwijn, for example, does really well on minutes per FPL point, but you're never going to have him sort of in your team. But I was debating whether leaving Doherty in. In the end, I thought I'd leave him in. If they don't sign Spence, maybe even if they do, and we're seeing that he's playing quite a lot of minutes, the points he was getting per his start and per appearance were really high. So he's set in the side. Reece James is next. I think, having 2 Chelsea fullbacks and wing-backs in this, even if you filter this by points, we're looking at these options and the first 3 players that we've talked about are all defenders, 2 of them being from Chelsea. So again, great value over there. Visser is an interesting one. Visser in 7th, he's 5.5 million. When the price was first announced for him, I think people were quite excited about him. He showed real glimpses of looking like a quality player last season. What is interesting is Neto coming in at 5.5 as well. He was kind of recovering from his injuries, had this big price drop. Now everyone's turning there, but I do wonder if Visser could be someone who does well. 92 points for him last season, but 15 minutes per FPL point as well. For example, that's not that much worse than Doherty, who was 14, Reece James 13, something like that. So Visser is definitely one to watch, and I think people have gone a bit cold on him at the moment, so he might be someone who ends up as a bit of a differential. A bit further down the list, we've got Tierney, always a player who I've loved to own but never got in, and I'm always sort of quite glad that I haven't when he does end up getting injured. But he's down to 5 million now. If he can stay fit, we know what kind of good option he is. Looking at Elise next, 5.5 million mid, 17 minutes per point. For him, his sort of role in the team is really kind of up in the air. We never know how many minutes he's going to play. I really do feel like if he gets a run in the team, a good run in the team, gets that full kind of backing of Vieira, he's really someone to watch. And that's what this list is about. This table is about players who not necessarily didn't play a lot last season or play in every game, but if they can break into that first team, they're going to offer really, really strong options for next season. Mahrez is there. Mahrez is always there on these lists, down to 135 points. For him, a minutes per FPL point of 12 when he does play. We know what a good option he is when he does start. Again, Chilwell's top of this is with 10, so not far off of Chilwell levels, but again, it's those security of starts and the minutes that he plays. It's my boy next, Bruno Guimaraes. He's there, 6 million. Interesting to know his role. We're going to see from him next season. Are Newcastle going to go out and buy another centre mid? Will we see Guimaraes dropping a bit deeper? We're going to see him, how's he going to play with Willock, who was injured a bit as well last year? Is he going to carry on saying box to box, or will they use him in a kind of deeper role? We'll probably see over pre-season, and I think we'll have a good idea about how Newcastle are going to line up given the signings that they're going to make. So hopefully we see Guimaraes at the kind of top of any midfield three. And then he can do what we kind of saw from him doing last season, making great runs into the box and scoring goals. Aït-Nouri, 4.5, great price for him, particularly with the injuries Wolves have got in defence. Semedo's out, for example. Marçal's getting on a bit as well. So we're going to expect Aït-Nouri to start on the left wing-back position. Only 87 points last season, but minutes per point of 21, which is really nice. I think he's if Wolves can get that defensive strategy back, I think he's a better option than Cody, for example, who's going to cost you 5. You've got to go right down to 43rd to find your first goalkeeper. If we're looking at minutes per FPL point, I think that shows the difference between sort of looking at overall points for goalkeepers and this minutes per FPL point. It's Raya who does best in terms of minutes per FPL points across all goalkeepers. Obviously missed a big chunk of last season through injury, but performed really well when he was kind of in the side. And strikers was really tough because there wasn't any good strikers for ages. I think Tony was something like 200th on the list. When I looked at the value using price and minutes per points. The first player who came up who I thought could realistically be an option for us next season is Daka. He was bought for a lot of money from Leicester. His 17 minutes per points is high. He did do well when he played, but didn't really get a lot of chances, and that was despite Vardy, missing out through injury. Iheanacho's knocking around. We've got Vardy back now. I do wonder if next season, though, we might start seeing a bit more of a shift towards Daka as that kind of lone frontman. So again, not someone I'd advise starting the season with, but someone to definitely monitor. So if we're building a team of best value players based on points per minute and price, that gives you a team that looks like this. And again, I don't think this looks too bad as well. So you've got Raya in goal. We've got Tierney, Doherty, James, Aït-Nouri and Chilwell. And you've got Mahrez, Bruno Guimaraes, Elise, Visser, and Daka. So again, if you're looking for kind of cheap players, if you're looking for differentials, if you're looking for players who you think, maybe you think this is going to be Mahrez's year because Sterling's leaving, we know what kind of he can offer. If you're looking at a player like Elise and thinking this is going to be his breakout season, these are players that you want to add to your watch list. Really keep your eye on. Players like James and Chilwell and Raya are great for the start of the season. Some other players that we're showing here maybe later on in the season could kind of emerge as those breakout players. So hopefully this has been useful. It's been quite fun putting this kind of stuff together. Hope it's talking about some players that you maybe haven't considered so much. If you have liked the video, do consider dropping me a like on the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. And I'll be back tomorrow, tomorrow on the 8th, with the first team draft of Gianni Bottici. So look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks, guys.